Hi, a very good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Professor Susan Elliott, Provost and Senior Vice President, Monash University. Professor Dr. Adiba Kamarul Zaman, President and Pro-Vice Chancellor, Monash University, Malaysia. Senior leadership and colleagues from Monash University, esteemed panelists, honored guests and members of the media. Welcome to the second of 3 Global Challenge Forums organized in celebration of the 25th anniversary of Monash University, Malaysia, titled Empowering Education for Thriving Communities. Climate change, thriving communities, and geopolitical security, the 3 major themes coming out of the Impact 2030 strategic plan focused on addressing these challenges of the age for the betterment of our communities, both locally and globally. The Impact 2030 strategic plan by Monash University charts the path for how Monash University will actively contribute to addressing these challenges through our research and education, and in collaboration with stakeholders, namely the government, industry, alumni, donors, and community. Today's panel discussion on the theme of thriving communities will dissect the issues surrounding access to quality education as a catalyst for a vibrant and thriving community. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get into it, please join me in welcoming the President and PVC of Monash University, Malaysia, Professor Dr. Adiba, to deliver her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Ridwan, and Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for braving the rain and traffic to be here this afternoon. Professor Sue Elliott and I were a bit worried that we were not going to have an audience, but we're very pleased to have all of you join us for this very important discussion. As you heard from Ridwan, this year, believe it or not, Monash Malaysia is 25 years old. Time has flown very quickly, and this week is a week of celebrations of that amazing achievement, if I say so myself, but I can't say it because I'm only 8 weeks old. It's it's on the back of everyone who came before me and the staff and students at Monash currently. That I'll tell you about all our achievements later because I know you want to get on to the panel. But this is part of that 25 years celebration of us being here. A global university, highly ranked university right here in Malaysia, doing a bit of an advertisement for those of you with young children in Malaysia. But and as part of that global aspiration, we want to address global challenges, namely climate change, geopolitical security, as well as thriving communities, and how best to address thriving, to ensure that communities thrive would be through having access to good education, and of course, as a doctor, I would also say good health. They come hand in hand. So we are extremely fortunate this afternoon to have 4 eminent speakers, panels, to enlighten us on this topic. YB Syed Saddiq, who I know many of you here, or all of you here know of Syed Saddiq, and his real passion for educating the young, and amongst other reforms that he's very passionate about. We have Puan Azlina Kamal from Unicef, who's also, I've had the good fortune to be on a similar panel, not on education, but on human rights earlier this year, wasn't it, Azlina? Who's also extremely passionate and been working in this area for many years now. And Kelvin Tan, who received an award as one of our 25th anniversary alumnus, one of the superstars. And last but not least, Shahnaz Al-Sadat, who also has made education her mission. And this panel will be moderated by Professor Sue Elliott, Provost from Melbourne, Sue, for those of you who don't know of the changes that's happening at the top at Monash, whereby our current President and Vice Chancellor, Professor Margaret Gardner, has been appointed as the Governor of Victoria, and Sue, very shortly on her return to Melbourne in August, will take on the role as Interim Vice Chancellor. So we're very fortunate to have Sue with us this afternoon, and of course our panel of speakers. So please do enjoy and ask lots of questions of our esteemed panelists later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Adiba. I'd like now to invite the Provost and Senior Vice President, Professor Susan Elliott, as well as the panel members to step onto the stage and to have your seats in front.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you, and I echo Professor Dato, Dr. Adiba's comments that it's wonderful that you've braved the rain and the thunder to come and hear this wonderful panel tonight. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Dato, Dr. Adiba, as President and Pro-Vice Chancellor of Monash University, Malaysia, Professor Matthew Nicholson, Senior Vice President, Research and Operations, esteemed panellists, members of the media, and of course our guests. The title of today's forum is Empowering Education for Thriving Communities. We all have our own ideas of what a thriving community is. What does it mean to thrive? But we know that it's a universal aspiration. The people are given the support and means needed to achieve their potential and lead comfortable and fulfilled lives. As you've heard, Monash's strategic plan, Impact 2030, sets out 3 global challenges with which we will address working with our alumni, industry, governments, and the communities. They are climate change, geopolitical securities, and of course, enabling thriving communities. We commit in Impact 2030 to better understanding of these challenges and to creative and innovative solutions for them, and to research and education that creates new responses, behaviours and practices. In Impact 2030, thriving communities is characterised as the challenge of how we all live well with the health that Dr. Adiba has just described, and how we all live well together. The contemporary problems embedded in this challenge include medical, health and technological issues about the individual, family and population, the burden of disease, systemic social issues of inequality and disadvantage, intolerance, discrimination and violence. Education is a key driver of thriving communities, providing the pathway to lift individuals out of poverty and disadvantage and give them the skills to provide for themselves and for their families and to contribute back to their community and society. Not only is there a causal relationship between level of income and education across both genders, but there are also social and economic returns on education. It correlates with a greater trust in others, participation in volunteering activities, and political efficacy. It correlates with the emergence and sustainability of democratic political institutions. There's also a strong positive relationship between years of schooling and numbers of university with the gross domestic product growth. And education is inversely correlated with child mortality. Conversely, a lack of education can lead to poor educational attainment and have long-lasting impacts, including perpetuation of social and economic inequalities and entrenching of discrimination and marginalisation. Less education is linked to poorer employment opportunities, lower income, which is linked to poorer health and a shorter lifespan. Lower education is also associated with poorer mental health, including a lack of sense of control and resilience. Children of people that are poorly educated and from low socioeconomic backgrounds also tend to do less well in education than children from higher socioeconomic groups, entrenching intergenerational disadvantage. However, despite this overwhelming evidence, a quality education is still not available to all, and for some, existing education models, programs and practices do not always provide the education that they need to thrive. The educational needs of communities also continue to change as society, technologies and educational theory continues to change and evolve. The rapid transition to online learning during the COVID-19 pandemic has been a very interesting case study of efficiency in delivery of education, but are not able to meet the social and mental health needs of students. Malaysia is clearly well known for its well-structured, quality and affordable education system, but access to education in Malaysia and the Southeast Asia generally remains a challenge for many communities facing barriers such as poverty and geographic isolation. So today our purpose is to look at the intersection between education and thriving communities with a particular focus on Malaysia, including the questions: what role does education play in supporting thriving communities? What are the problems or barriers to thriving communities that are experienced in the education system? And importantly, what are the potential solutions to these problems? To help unpack these issues, as Professor Dr. Adiba has described, we've gathered a panel with deep expertise across all sectors of education, primary, secondary and tertiary, to allow them to share their insights, experiences and ideas in what we hope will be a very thought-provoking discussion. So now to the panel. Thank you very much. Our education experts have very different experiences and perspectives, but are united in their ambitions to improve the quality and accessibility of education in Malaysia. Our panel members are YB Syed Saddiq, Member of the Malaysian Parliament for Muar, former Minister for Youth and Sport, and the first President of the Malaysian United Democratic Alliance. Welcome, Saddiq. Kelvin Tan, co-founder and CEO, Project ID, founder of EdFlow and a former public school teacher. Shahnaz Al-Sadat, entrepreneur and co-founder and chairperson of Leap Ed Services, a social enterprise supporting educational transformation programs and projects in the Malaysian education system. And Azlina Kamal, Unicef Education Specialist and Lead, responsible for providing advice and guidance on education programs in Malaysia. Please welcome our panel members. Welcome and thank you very much for agreeing to participate in the discussion today. We have about an hour to explore the issues related to the contribution that education makes to thriving communities. And I'll ask you each some questions and then we're going to throw to our audience who I'm sure will be stimulated by the discussion and want to ask questions of you also. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on the Monash University Malaysia YouTube channel. So I look forward to hearing your insights. And if I could start with Azlina. Based on the work that UNICEF has done globally and particularly in Malaysia, could you give us a brief overview of the situation affecting children in education systems in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you very much. I told everybody that probably the naughty student goes first. So I just wanted to share my favorite philosopher is Foucault. And I love this quote because I think it contextualizes the philosophical underpinning with which we should approach issues and topic. So he says, my point is not that everything is bad, but that everything is dangerous, which is not exactly the same as bad. If everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. So my position leads not to apathy, but to hyperactivism. I think that the ethical political choice we have to make every day is to determine which is the main danger. So with that, I wanted to share a little bit, right? So we know that as a result, there were a lot of issues everywhere. Especially in Malaysia, we had children dropping out. I think the statistics was 40,000 students a year, which translated to one child every 2 minutes. So there was already issues with children dropping out for a variety of reasons. And this was before COVID. So we know that COVID exacerbated all the inequalities, a whole host of issues, not just in terms of learning losses, but also in terms of all the basic services that children get from being part of the schooling system, right? Which was then denied to children. For example, nutrition, mental health. And being at home, there was also the danger of children in close proximity with abuse and exploitation, etc., etc. And I just wanted to share some of the other statistics, which was already really alarming even before. 38% of children not learning basics. We had 50%, so 1 in 2, children with disabilities going to school. And in in low-income countries, 90% of adolescents in the poorest quintile did not attend or have already dropped out. And in high-income country, it's as high as 40%. So there was already a learning crisis even before the pandemic. So what happened very quickly, because I know that I was just saying that educators can go on and on speaking. So at the height of the pandemic, we had 1.6 billion children whose education is disrupted, and 325 million of these children were in the East Asia and Pacific. In Malaysia, we know close to 5 million children's education were affected. Schools remain closed for 168 million children for an entire academic year. And the learning loss for children is estimated up to 2 years of disruption in terms of their learning. And then if you look at a whole host of other types of marginalization and levels of marginalization, if you look at girls, if you look at children, and you mentioned that very eloquently in your opening speech about children living in poverty. And so, all these issues impacted children. But we know that it brought a whole host of challenges, but COVID also gave us an opportunity to look at a once-in-a-generation opportunity to look at how we can build back our education systems and to accelerate all the different things that we've all been waiting and saying that, we need to make education systems more resilient, more inclusive. How do we build back better and stronger? And we've been able to a certain extent. There's been a lot of work in terms of including children. There are also still a lot of issues and challenges. I will stop there and I will share some of my other reflections a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Azlina. I'm going to ask you to share your reflections now, because in thinking about this, how do you see us reimagining education, particularly for marginalised children?
Okay, very good. Sorry, I hope you don't get bored listening to my voice. Feels like a bit of a monologue. There's some things that we know, right? So, even those of us working with marginalized groups, we talk about the marginalized population as though they were a homogeneous group, right? So I think we know they were the most affected, but they are not a homogeneous group. So when we think about marginalization, it is important to think about layers and levels of marginalization. So say, for example, if a child lives in the urban area or rural area, she's a girl, if she comes from a bottom 40 group, if she has disability, if she lives far from school, if the household income is of a certain level, or if the parents have lost their jobs, or the child then has to be involved in, caregiving or income for the family, right? So I think the more we look at different levels and layers of marginalization, then I think looking at more targeted responses become really important, because what the appeal is to do more. Right? So we all think, we all need to do something. And so we think, let's just do something, right? But the thing is that a one-size-fits-all approach, just saying that, they're marginalized, they need something, is not going to cut it. Because different groups with different layers and levels of marginalization will require different things. So the simplest thing, right? Giving a laptop, 35% of children in rural areas as opposed to 36% in urban areas did not have access to any type of devices, for example. So the thing is that, let's just give children. But if they live in places where there is no data or connectivity, or parents are deciding between feeding their children, the laptop is not going to be useful, right? So thinking about marginalization as a multiple deprivation, through a multiple deprivation lens or analysis, I think becomes important. Because then we are driven by what the data shows us and how do we then respond accordingly. There's a statistic that says to us that just because we do more, it will take us 100 years to reach a girl with disability, right? So it's not going to accelerate any progress in terms of 2030, for example. And I think the other thing that I wanted to share, and I'm also constantly reflecting and interrogating myself about this, right? Those of us who are in positions of privilege, we always look at deprivation or marginalization as something, based on a charity model, right? So we need to do something because you don't have something. So there is that dynamic of having to do something because someone doesn't have something. When we look at education, it is a right to education, right? So an inalienable right. So we're not looking at, I'm doing something for you out of the goodness of my heart because you need it. It is a right, a fundamental right. So I think moving to a more developmental model, an approach in terms of the interventions that we do, I think that becomes absolutely crucial.
Thank you very much, Azlina. I might pass to Kelvin. Kelvin, you're a Teach from Malaysia alum, which is congratulations. And as working with Teach from Malaysia, you're on ground zero working with students from various educational and economic backgrounds. What kind of transformations have you seen in those lower income communities as a result of having access to education?
Thanks, Prof. So just to give a bit of context, yes, I started my career as a public school teacher under the Teach from Malaysia program in its first cohort. So I taught in a B40 school in Klang. It was a school that was ranked the bottom 300 in the whole of Malaysia at that time. Shortly after that, I joined corporate, tech, and then now I'm back in education. And what my organization does is we run soft skill education for secondary school students, and we focus on 3 areas: leadership, social emotional learning, and career aspirations. Now, and we've been doing this for about 10 years in this organization. And when it comes to quality education or transformation that a person experiences through quality education, I'm going to share with you 2 examples. of transformation witnessed from my experience. So I'm going to tell you a story, start with a story of a student. Let's call him M. Yeah? M is from Penang. And he went to one of the best schools in Penang. Now, he came from a B40 family. B40 is considered as the bottom 40% in terms of household income. Right? And M worked hard. M is a smart student. He gunned for opportunities whenever the schools and teachers gave him those opportunities. And most recently, M got a scholarship to do his A-levels. And recently, it was announced that he was one of the Malaysian students who will be attending Stanford for his undergrad. And then, here's another story. Let's call her H. H is a student from Klang, urban poor. H came from a school that is ranked very low in the country. H's mom worked really hard to make sure that she can feed her family. And on weekends, H would sometimes help her mom sell kueh, food. But H had an opportunity to do some leadership program because she felt that she had this natural inkling and ability to participate. And so H worked hard. And despite being in a school that is considered as marginalized and lower rank, H represented Malaysia in archery. And after that, I remember talking to H because H was a student of mine. I worked with her through Project ID, our career aspirations program. In Form 1, H said, I wanted to be a doctor. In Form 4, H said, I might want to be a pediatrician. In Form 5, when she was sitting for her papers at high school, I asked, how's it going? How's your ambition? And she said, you know what? I'm torn between sports science and pediatrician because I'm doing very well in sports. But do you know what H ended up with doing? She decided to pursue a diploma in computer science because she had an opportunity when she was interning with us in Project ID. She attended a talk in MDAC about women in tech. And there was an opportunity for a scholarship in a local university to do a diploma in computer science. And that sort of opened her eyes. And today, H is on a Korean government scholarship to do her degree in computer science, right? So the point I want to make is we talk about quality education, and a lot of times it emphasizes on the quality of schools and quality of academics. But if you see, and if you have a chance to even read the reflections of M and H, both who come from very different schools, but seemingly similar backgrounds, seemingly similar achievements, they credit a lot of their success to access to opportunities. They credit their success to people who support them, the environment. And you know what? The truth is, when it comes to quality education, it is beyond academics, right? It is the environment the child grew up in. It is the parental support that they put in. And most importantly, it's the mindset that we nurture in these students. So when we talk about transformation, I just wanted to highlight these very specific stories because I'm sure at a more national level, there are a lot of amazing transformation. I'm sure YB Syed Saddiq can tell us more what happens at the national level. Azlina as well, since she works very closely with the ministry. Shahnaz has an amazing story with her organization because they run this program called the Trust School Program that brings in 21st century learning into schools in Malaysia. And they've had amazing results at the national level, in fact, or regional and national level. But yeah, those are just two stories of transformation I wanted to share.
They're absolutely wonderful stories for both M and H, really great outcomes. How do we give those sort of opportunities across a broad spectrum of youth and children?
Prof, I asked myself that question 10 years ago, and that's how we landed on the work that we're currently doing. But I think there are a few things that we can do to arrive at that, right? I think the first thing is, again, like I said, if you just speak to some of these students who are very successful, they won't attribute to academic excellence because they have that, right? It's quite natural. But they will attribute the change, the pivot in their mindset from access to opportunity, from people who cared, from programs that gave them a chance to explore leadership, to explore digital literacy, to explore soft skills. So students like M and H, they always come back to us because they feel that a lot of the work that we do in soft skill development has helped them, and they want to do more of that for their students. So that's why in our work, we believe a lot in soft skill development, in things like leadership, in things like social emotional learning. We have this, in our organization, we have this survey, we call it the Student Voice Matters Survey. If you just Google Student Voice Malaysia, it'll be the first thing that comes up. And when you ask students, what else can we do to further support you? There's a whole bunch of information in there. So number one, they will say, we want more rest in learning. When we ask them about soft skill development, they will tell you that, communications and problem solving, I'm very satisfied with learning those skills, contrary to a lot of the conversation that goes on out there. But what's the one thing that they feel like they could receive more? Stress management. Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make here is also that what we can do in trying to create more change is to listen. Like, how can we listen to our beneficiaries a lot, and in this case, our students a lot more? And sometimes those things can help us make sure that we don't, or make sure that we solve the right problem for the community.
Thank you very much. Shahnaz, you come from a corporate background, but you're now fully hands-on in developing primary education. What are the key challenges as you see them being faced by students and teachers?
Thank you, Prof. So I had about 20 years of corporate experience. Until about 10 years ago, I woke up and and decided I wanted to come closer to the ground. I think even the corporate, I was actually in Kazana, so I was already working on nation building. But it's very high level. I really just wanted to come quite close to the ground, and I quit and became a social entrepreneur. So my observation, really, even though I come from a corporate background, I left it already more than 13 years now, more than 10 years. And not only LIPED, I also had the opportunity of co-founding Teach for Malaysia. So based on those two social enterprises, LIPED and Teach for Malaysia, my observations come actually from more than 1,000 schools, I think, in Malaysia, roughly. And about 200,000 students. So when you were talking about primary education, the truth is actually for us, we could look at cradle to grave, really. I mean, you can do any part of that and you will still add value, right? Because it's lifelong learning. But when we were looking at transformation, where do we actually want to invest in transformation? I think we saw that 10 to 16 years old is probably where we need to. Early education is the best outcome, but a bit too far to productive life cycle. Universities, closest to productive, but a bit too late, right? So 10 to 16 years, kind of the sweet spot. I mean, that's the investment speak. And when we look at it, therefore, when we look at the system, it's a basic education, basically, right? So it straddles that too, primary and secondary. And in Malaysia, 5 million students, as we said, but 99.9% are actually delivered by the government because it's under Ministry of Education. It's only a small amount actually delivered through private. So when we were looking at and actually thriving community is really interesting because at the end of the day, thriving community is driven by people. right? You can throw in technology, you can throw in all sorts of things. At the end of the day, it's going to be the people. And people will come through the outcome, as we said, the access that they have into the education, the people that they actually interact is actually going to be the one that actually makes them up. So what we saw, I think, in terms of Malaysia, I think we were looking at our children basically, and I always just start with children, because when I talk about system, I start with children. Because sometimes we have a tendency of doing so much, we forgot for who are we actually doing it. So when we look at the children of Malaysia, we said, well, generally they're very good behaved, actually, obedient relatively. And when we go to schools, we're working. But what we found is that what's missing, I guess, against what the world, for them, for the future, is confidence level, critical thinking, creativity, communication, ability to communicate, and coexistence, so collaborating. I mean, this is more than 10 years ago. When we were looking at that, at the end of the day, it's not about doing things to them, but how do you unleash their potential in all these areas, right? So it's empowerment becomes quite important for them, even as beneficiary. And that's interesting because the access to opportunities is more like, maybe it's there, but how do you then make them be able to reach out, have that confidence to go out and try things out? And the challenge that these kids have, therefore, is not content. I think sometimes we have a tendency of, the future is about robotics, throw robotic as a subject. But actually, it's not. It's about learning how to learn, right? So it's not content mastery. So you have to allow them the space, to create that ability. Now, the challenge we have in actually doing that is, at the end of the day, the closest, and Kevin will know this, the biggest influence is a teacher, right? So for a teacher to be able to allow the children they have to transform, right? Because they have to also feel empowered, right? They also then have to know how to then create that positive learning environment, change their language in actually speaking to the students, being less a teacher, maybe more facilitator. I mean, that's kind of like a coach, kind of. Now, for a teacher to be able to do that, their challenge, I have to say, is the ecosystem. How does the ecosystem support teachers to do that? And in Malaysia, I mean, at the end of the day, as we were looking at the landscape, the closest collective teacher, and the other thing, teacher can't work alone, because a teacher can be excellent by him or herself, but the most effective, I think this comes from research, that collective teacher that's actually make the most change, right? And the closest unit is a school. So the question in Malaysia is that we have to transform schools, right? At the end of the day. Now, transform to what? I mean, this is a thing, I think Trust Schools, as Kelvin mentioned, was a model that we work with Ministry of Education to then look at the implementable model. Because if you read at policies that we have, which is, I always say this: menu, policy, recipe, curriculum. Okay, the chefs are the teachers, right? So when you look at a menu, nampak, it's so nice, looks nice. And then when we look at curriculum, the recipe, it's not bad. Some areas for improvement, it's not bad actually. But when you go down to where it's actually the cooking is happening, it doesn't look like the recipe that we said it is, or it sometimes doesn't even look. And the menu is actually not being implemented. So the problem is implementation, right? So empowering schools requires supporting them to be that way. And we have therefore to take the pain. It is a process, right? It's not like you can do something overnight. You have to give them that space actually for them to be able to do that. So we have proven it can be done. It's just that pandemic threw a bit of a spanner. It's a huge disruption. It was a shock actually to the system. So even the best of schools, I think, got into a frozen kind of mode. And today, I think post-pandemic, particularly, the additional C's now, right? Because we have to now look at citizens, being a good citizen, not just global Malaysia, but digital citizen. I think pandemic has made all our kids are learning all online. And it's not another world that you don't have values. You have to have values, right? So we don't actually do that part. And I think that's the next thing. The other bit is health literacy, really, because, your physical, emotional, your financial health, all that will require. And again, teachers are probably going to be under pressure because you can only look at what is the health literacy at teachers level. I think some of the data points showing it's only 20 or 30%. So you can't expect kids to then have high health literacy if your own educators have not. So that's something I think that we have to ponder now in the next 10 years. But in the world of implementation, as you say, you have to choose which danger. So this is a bit, I think, that going to come for the next 10 years. We have to keep on thinking, right? We have to keep on innovating.
Thank you very much, Shahnaz. You've really put the teacher and the transformation of the educator or the chef at the centre of the transformation you're viewing. How do we do that? Does it go back to universities and teacher training, or can those teachers already out in the classrooms undergo the sort of evolution that you're describing?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. It's just that just looking at the landscape of Malaysia, the in-service teachers, the teachers who are already in this system, probably about 95%, if I'm correct, right? Because the pre-service teachers, the new teachers that's coming in, is only in only a certain percentage that's coming in. We still have a long runway, basically, right? Some of our teachers. So if you want to transform, you have to work with the majority. You have to find a tipping point on the majority, and that's the in-service teachers. So that's actually where we invest a lot in. And you were saying, so what do they have to do in order to transform? It's not just skills. Skills is important, though, I must say. I think one of the things we say, it's not content. So it's the way you deliver, right? So that's the pedagogical skills. I think the work that LIPED does, actually looking at, okay, so what in the array or all the pedagogical pillars that the teachers have to master? I think there's 7 pillars that we said teachers have to master it. Because if you try and give them 1,000, they do nothing. Right? Okay, so very specifically. But on top of that, the skills alone not enough. You have to talk about their mindset and their culture. And that's changing, their own behaviors and, their own worldviews, right? So it is not easy. I mean, I'm not going to say easy. My fellow colleagues are there. They're probably, it's not easy, but it can be done. So I think, we have seen it happening. But it requires the whole ecosystem to continuously support it because, you want it to be sustainable. You need it to be continued and thinking the next level. So it can be done. But you're right. So to me, educators, teachers are right in the center of that. And they're going to be the make or break, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much. YB Saddiq, this brings us to you, and you've been well on the record as being passionate about education. And you've said in the past that Malaysian higher education needs urgent reform. You've listed micro-credentials, allowing earlier specialisations in technical and vocational education, and other possible solutions towards this reform. What do you see as the first steps to achieve the vision that you have for education?
Thank you very much. I think the most important ingredient is political will. Weirdly enough, because that's the epicenter of change. And to be honest, when I was serving in cabinet then, multiple different governments and prime ministers and ministers of education have already commissioned multiple consultancies, whether local or international, data-driven decision-making process. And when I read through one by one, it has the same suggestions, but just a lack of political will to implement it. Because it's tough, it may be unpopular, and as a consequence, it's not done. So I'm not sure how many more white papers or strategies where we're calling Hazana and others all come together, but it's just not done. So the reason why I say political will and not just one particular policy prescription or putting in more money is because in contrast to popular belief, Malaysia is the leader when it comes to education spending in this region. We have about 6 to 7 ministries dealing with education because TVET is divided into multiple different ministries. And in total, when you add it up, we spend almost 20% of our GDP per capita on education. If you look at the actual number, it's 15%, but then when you include other ministries like even KBS, Sumber Manusia, and many others who actually also administer many different universities, colleges, TVET, then it's about 20 to 21%. To put it into context, Singapore, which leads the region when it comes to education, spends 11%. Japan spends 7%, India spends 3%. We spend so much. But yet, above and beyond that, when I meet up with friends from Taylor's, Monash, and many of the private universities, including the owners of private schools, they are telling me that more and more middle-class parents are sending their children, not just in tertiary education, in private colleges and universities, but also in international schools. And a study showed that they are willing to spend middle class, I'm not talking about the rich, right? They're willing to spend a quarter of their monthly income on their children's education because of a lack of trust. And that's where parents in the room, you may realize you may have gone to national schools before, the Asuntas of the world, and then today, try think about it, where are you sending your children to? And you'll realize there's a big gap. So, to me, the biggest issue here is not just about money, but it's about overhauling the system. So it's not just, I will go deep into that, but I think we need to start from a point to acknowledge that it's not just about throwing more money, but it's about structurally changing policies, focus, subjects, and having the political will to do so. But while I say the political will, I want to caution it a little bit, because I think that political will must be done via a select committee which is backed by bipartisanship. Why I say that? Because education is very sensitive. The last thing we should want is that when there is political instability, a new minister comes in, a new subject brought in, a new course, new focus, new system. We've had that, from the days of the PPSMI, and then the abolition of PPSMI, now a hybrid system, and then now different states wanting to explore different options. So the point I'm trying to make here is, whichever path we choose to take, it must be backed up with serious bipartisanship and true experience. Whenever it's done via a select committee, there is continuity, and also you divorce a lot of the political noises outside because you want to do actual work inside. And that's where you can meet up with policy experts, NGOs, NGIs, get it in, log it in for the next 20 years and implement it and share the credit together. Because once you do that, then you have continuity in political will. And finally, we need to start by acknowledging that, it's not just higher education. As I shared, the last time we had proper PISA rankings, the average comprehension of a Malaysian student, 15-year-old, is 3 years behind our Singaporean peers. I don't like whenever we want to compare to countries, Vietnam, Thailand, not to say they are beneath us, no, but we should be looking at the best in the region. Since when do Malaysia accept complacency and to be in the middle? We should be at the top and we should compare with the top. And I'm very worried, especially when we look at the most latest data, as all panelists rightfully pointed out, with COVID coming in. I think from 3 years being behind, I see it myself in my constituency in Muar. I think now it's most likely 5 years because, again, the official stats from the Ministry of Education says that in Sabah, Sarawak, during times of COVID, only half the students have even a tablet or laptop to access online education. I'm not talking about good internet, I'm just talking about the tool to access online education. In Semenanjung, it's about 37% which don't have it. So 1 out of 3. In Sabah, Sarawak, it's 1 out of 2. Above and beyond that, when you look deeper into the numbers, when they say that they have access, the registration is just maybe once a week, twice a week they enter classes. Because the fact of the matter is, I've seen it myself, my constituency, when they say, this is part of the official statistic where they join classes. But when I see them, this is a family with 5 children, only 1 smartphone, not even a tablet, a smartphone which belongs to the father. The father goes to work, the father has to leave behind the phone, accessed by the first child, Monday first child, Tuesday second child, Wednesday third child, and you can imagine it that way. Therefore, the disconnect is huge. And I'm very worried moving forward. We have to play catch up. While this is slightly more of a pessimistic picture, I'm still very optimistic because I think with the advancement of technology, with tech, with digitization, that catch up can happen. But Malaysia must have the political will to disrupt our education system. If not, we will always play catch up. I don't think we'll be a failed state, but we'll be stuck in the middle. And I don't think Malaysia should accept being stuck in the middle. Thank you. To be very careful with my answer, you know. I mean, being part of cabinet before, out, and then in opposition, and then now in government, but then somewhere there, I've realized that unless the Prime Minister, it's actually less than, unless the Prime Minister really is willing and have the political courage and iron in him or her to do it, it will be tough. Because it's very easy to fall back to status quo. Because status quo is safe. Status quo is popular. But that status quo is a slow decline. It doesn't kill Malaysia, but it is a slow decline. So whether there is political will today, on that I'm slightly more pessimistic. But I think it can change if you have a very strong leader with a heart in education, willing to bite the bullet during the first 2-3 years being unpopular. And then when data comes out where I believe it will be positive, then I believe the public will understand. So it's someone who can really brace the storm in moving forward. To just show some very personalized examples. When we were discussing before, I mean, very simple things, right? When we were discussing about ensuring that our universities are a lot more competitive, therefore auditing, I mean, vicious auditing, which is driven by data, not by political interest, of which colleges can open or not. Not universities, but these are the private independent colleges, in which are reliant on PT-PTN funding. So it's state funding, but in reality, the vast majority of graduates will be left unemployed. They're offering courses which are not competitive. And in the end, they're actually taking away students from TVET potential. That's why TVET today, we have about 600 colleges under TVET, but the take-up rate of TVET is less than 50%. So much so that when I meet up with the lecturers at TVET, now they have an additional KPI, which is to find students. Even though it's 100% subsidized, it's free, guys. I mean, it's free. And you get a monthly allowance. And yet the take-up rate is below 50%. So when we're discussing about this, then you'll have very strong lobby interest saying, these are Bumi Putra colleges, which offers jobs, cannot take it down. And then come another group which says, oh, we cannot cut down these courses because there are lecturers teaching here. It's okay for students to study, take a long time, 5-6 years. If not, if they graduate early, then they'll be unemployed. Which to me is mind-boggling. Right? I mean, you need to really take the bull by the horn instead of, playing safe all the time because, again, we are declining. When we talk about the importance of English, right? I can tell you when we're discussing about one policy and decentralization and potentially allowing back a lot more English schools to take place. But it'll be up to the discretion and power of the at the district level. So if they want it, you do it. Right? It's not we're forcing them. And also bringing back the prominence of English. It was opposed by almost all parties. I'm telling you, it was opposed by almost all parties. Right? Because then there's specific vernaculars which want to be prioritized, or then you are undermining the Malay language, which to me, again, is not that. I mean, ideally, as a policymaker, I want all Malaysians to be trilingual. The strength of Malaysia is when we are trilingual, or at least bilingual. Whenever we meet up with investors, they will say, wow, you guys are critical thinking, very hardworking, you understand English, and at the same time, now you also understand Mandarin. That's our strength. It is a added value, not a negative. But I want to just summarize it in this, and which ties back to political will. When I was in cabinet then, I mean, even though some may say it was rude, but I really said with the right intentions. And when I sit in parliament today, whenever there are those who are in positions of power who oppose the structural reforms by saying that it is unpopular, will be voted out, or it is against specific traditional values, I always point the question back to them. Now in a position of comfort and power, where do you send your children to and where do you send your grandchildren to? And when I ask them, they start looking at me like, I also did my homework. I know where they send your children, grandchildren to. But it's telling. I mean, you send your children and grandchildren to the best of private international schools, either locally or abroad, I mean, fine, that's your choice. I'm not here to judge you or moralize this. But the least you can do is to fight for the change in public schools. Not stop that change while allowing your children to go get the best education but depriving the underprivileged or middle class of the same quality education. And it's not about money anymore, it is about policies. So I think if we don't have the moral courage to do that, I'm very worried about the state of our education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've heard all from our four panellists. I'm going to turn it over to you and to questions that you might want to pose. Feel free. Yes, here. I think there's a microphone coming down to you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much. It was a very fruitful conversation we had just now. So my name is Azam. I come from a family those are educators. My mother, my grandfather, my great-grandfathers are all educators. And I myself has a company that focuses on this. So now as a PhD student, I see in my university and other public universities in Malaysia that there seems to be a gap between what we have developed, our research, our findings in the university, and translating that to government to implement them. Compare that to my other colleagues in Philippines, for example, their university, there seems to be an integration between the universities and the government, that they can apply what they find effectively. But for us in Malaysia, well, I personally see that there's a gap. So I want to hear maybe from Syed Saddiq particularly, because you come from NUS, last time you studied in NUS, and you see the quality of education there, how they implement what they find and how they implement it to the government. And of course, opinions from the rest of the panels, very welcome. That's my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Saddiq.
Thank you very much. That's a very good observation. I remember when I was in NUS during times of COVID, just when I was studying there, I was announced that NUS got an additional 50 million Sing dollars contribution from one billionaire from Hong Kong. But it was very focused on research field. And the reason why the billionaire picked NUS or Singapore in particular is because he knows that once that research is out, it will immediately be accepted by government without much bureaucratic barriers, converted into policy, and then felt by the public. But what I experienced in Malaysia, and I think I take blame on it as well, being in Parliament, is that there's a big gap, as you rightfully pointed out. We know what's good, we know what the country needs. But when it's on our table, we're like, how do we do this? This is tough, this will be unpopular, this may be dicey because it involves specific reforms on sensitive issues. But again, pushing the can down the line does not make it any better. So my suggestion, one, I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which don't necessarily touch those sensitive reforms, which maybe you can go for now. Right? And to be fair, I think today, we see an attempt to make universities a lot more independent, more professional. The appointments are at least moving in that direction. Not to say it's perfect, but I think it's better. And then now there's a lot more connections between industry and universities. So I think as long as it doesn't touch areas of structural reforms or sensitivities, I think you are in the green. If not, then my suggestion is this comes to the tougher part. There's a lower hanging fruit and tougher one. That's where you have to convert yourself to also become a lobbyist. Don't think a lobbyist, the dirty lobbying. No. TFM is one, right? Very effective. Until today, if a Minister of Education doesn't meet them, I think there's something wrong with that Minister of Education. They can meet up with the Prime Minister. They have very strong lobbying power because of the success stories, teachers, students, parents who back them up. So I think that's one area which you also need to build to get the message home and to hopefully translate theories and research into actual policies. But hopefully more young people like you in this field will be able to power the way in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel in response?
got an inbuilt microphone. I was just listening to some of the thoughts, and it actually also helped me think about a few things, right? So I just wanted to share some observations about education. And when we talk about quality education, right? So one, it's always struck me that working or transforming education is a little bit like time traveling, right? So those of us who've had our education in the past, living with the present challenges and trying to anticipate the future needs or what that world will be like for our children. So we're constantly juggling all these different phases of time. So that's one to be cognizant of, right? And the other thing about working in education or transforming education is a little bit like when you talk about the gaps, like fixing a plane, but you don't have the luxury of saying that, okay, let's just stop everything and figure out what's happening and then we continue flying. You have to do it while it's flying, right? And you have to figure it out, how are we going to do that, which is also the tricky bit. The other bit also is that, unlike health, where no one would say just because I've been to the hospital, I know the health system. No one would ever say that, right? In education, just because everyone has gone to school, everybody feels they know the professionalization of the education sector. And that's a problem, right? So everybody will say, I think this is what we need. I think this is what we need to teach. But no one's going to say that to a doctor just because I've gone in and seen a doctor and say that, no, actually, this is what we need to do to the medical sector. So I think those are three different things that I wanted to share. But, and also this whole idea of what constitutes quality. I feel like that there are things about the political will, but I also think that people don't have the same understanding of what quality education is. There are many different, aspects in which we can say, so are we talking about exams? Are we talking about great teachers? Are we talking about a flexible curriculum? Or agile system? Are we looking at number of A's? Are we looking at self-esteem and confidence? So many different things can be a candidate for quality or how we understand quality. And so there is a bit of a schizophrenia, right? Like everybody thinks, no, I think it's this now, right? So if Finland is doing, let's all just go and do like what, say for example, Finland. Oh no, this person, Singapore's doing this. And there's this constant flux. And I think that's also something that we need to interrogate and question a little bit. And very often, the thing that we go to is the easiest thing. So the most quantifiable, the most visible. Because the invisible things, the second order changes, right? So let's put money and we'll build this and we'll have labs and we'll do this. Those are the first order changes. They're easy to implement. But the second order changes, looking at practices, looking at learning environments, looking at what teachers do in the classroom. I think those are more difficult to do, and politicians usually don't have enough time. They need to make things visible and quick, right? So I think these were some of the things I was just thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Shahnaz.
I just want to say about selecting danger, though I completely agree about political will, it's just not a danger I want to select. I don't know enough about the academia and relationship to policies, but what I do observe is that in the country, unfortunately, not even just the political bit, but structurally, we do have an issue because, for example, Ministry of Education of Malaysia is a regulator, also a service provider, also employer of the teachers, and there is no professional body for the teachers to fight for the teachers. So you then in a situation that complete conflict of interest. I mean, I'm an accountant by profession, so my employer can't ask me to do anything beyond my ethical because I do have a professional body to go to, right? But in Malaysia, we don't have that. So over time, even And political will, unfortunately, education is such a long-term play. So even if somebody have the balls to do something today, it may not happen within the 5 years, right? You know what I mean? So, right? So potentially, but even structurally, we are so weak already at that point, even without that, right? So quality is not something somebody has to start this. It's a vicious cycle, kan? And that's a bit that I don't have an answer. I just know problems at the moment.
Yeah, Kelvin.
Yeah, so we've spoken a lot about political will, about everyone has an opinion in education, right? But there's something to recognize here, which is this passionate energy that Malaysians as citizens are playing, right? A lot of times we play a passive role at the mamaks and the dinner discussions, but and also talking to our politicians, right? But I also want to encourage us to recognize this energy, like the fact that all of us are here, right? Some of us just got an email from Rizwan and Monash and just decided to show up, right? Now there is something to recognize in that energy, and I highly encourage us to channel that energy. If we really care about education, let's do something about it, right? Lobby, volunteer, join Teach for Malaysia, intern with us, donate to Unicef maybe. Kidding. But the point is, really, education is a complex problem. The Ministry of Education is a behemoth of an organization, right? But there's a role for us to play. And there's no one-step solution, there are no 5-step solutions, there are no 10-step solutions, because it affects us at many different levels. The kind of communities that it impacts is so different. Not one person can solve it. I just want to call that out.
Thank you very much. So that one question stimulated lots of comment. I'll go to the centre here and then there. So, right?
Hi, my name is Suyen. I just quit corporate. 5 years. It took me 5 years. Starting an NGO. And I'm also recently appointed as a Selangor Unity Ambassador, Duta Perpaduan Selangor. So one of my proposal is, because I'm only given 4,000 ringgit grant to run community events, to me it's impossible. So during my interview, I suggested utilizing public infrastructure such as libraries. So just now when I was sitting down here, I was waiting for any one of you to touch base on libraries issue. So my question here is, what do you think we can do with our existing public libraries? The nearest one here is Pusaka KL at TDDI. If you guys haven't visited that, I encourage you guys visit it. Please fully utilize it. But my question here is, you said political will. So is there any policy in reforming this area? And to 3 of you here, is there any programs to nudge behaviors for the public or the children after school using the space if available there? Yeah. Thank you.
This is just to show how some things are very funny. You asked a brilliant question because it triggered back about my committee meeting 2 weeks ago. To give context, I'm part of the select committee in Parliament in charge of 6 different ministries. To call the name of the committee is really long, so I won't bother. But it's like education, higher education, sumber manusia, pelancongan, perpaduan, and then got Prime Minister's office. Okay, so it's very long. But when they were breaking down every single ministry, what agencies are placed under them, one particular item which keeps on getting kicked back from one ministry to another, which to be honest, I don't even know why it's placed under the ministry, is perpustakaan. No, like seriously, now, if I recall it right, they put it under perpaduan. And then from perpaduan, previously it was under pelancongan. Pelancongan, yeah, you can, because in other countries, you'll do it. So it moves around. Okay. And why I say this is problematic, because when you don't put a focus at it, it changes very quickly. Whoever as a minister will be like, it's just one of the many agencies under me, I will not have a proper look. And I'm worried, to give context, this is me being biased. In Muar, my constituency, I remember when I was first elected in 2018, I was looking at the state of the library, it was horrendous. I mean, like, it was a hazard. Like, if you go, it can collapse at any point in time. So then, obviously, I put in a plan to build a new library, which is within our youth hub, which will be completed end of this year. But to show how difficult it is, even though we got the funding, but because it moves from one ministry to another, it's not even under my jurisdiction, even though we secured the funding, we secured the location, we even have donors who will bring in books from all across the world to assist, but it cannot be done because there's so many bureaucracy. You'll think it's under education, it's not. So that's just to show how sad it is. I want to be very frank with you to level because I'll obviously raise your concern when we meet next week in the select committee. But that's just the reality of it. In other countries, they pride their libraries so much that there's adequate, sustainable funding. The budget is specifically carved out and discussed during the annual budget. I think there's a lot of improvements which we need to do there. And above and beyond that, there's a lot of tax incentives breaks given to corporates who also fund private libraries, not private libraries, public libraries. So I think that's one area. It's not just libraries, but also it's museums as well, if you ask me. But these are two areas which I think are not properly looked at. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, certainly.
I think it goes back to also the whole first order, second order changes, right? I think you can easily replace library with innovation centers, devices. I think what you can't just have libraries as a building and then expect people to go if there's no culture for learning, or there is no imagination of what that library is going to achieve in terms of the outcome. And so we all do this, right? We think that, oh, we need to have something, but then we don't think about what is it that we're trying to achieve really. Like technology is a means to learning. And so it's not about the technology, it's about the learning. Teachers are means to learning. Libraries are a means to learning, right? So if you don't focus on the learning and you're focusing on the technology, on this, on that, then you will never actually have the intended change because your thinking is at the physical level or providing it at the surface level and not using that thing to change something. And if you don't work that out, you will never then have that meaningful change. So to me, you can easily replace anything with anything, but it's about that. And then we all talk about programs, right? So easily Unicef can come and talk about, oh, we have this program, we do this, we do that. Someone else can talk about that, right? But all the ministry, all different ministries, we have so many duplications of different programs. So when you go and you say, we need to look at improving, oh, we have this program and that program. The issue is not about the program. The issue is about how are all of these things that we're doing converging and showing us a certain impact or outcome in terms of the learning of our children. So we all do this, right? And I'm also trying to resist doing this, to talk about what is the vision and the change we want to see instead of constantly talking about activities. We all stick at the activity program level without thinking about what is that vision and change we want to see and how do we design everything around that so that we can meaningfully say, after 5 years, this is the change that we have seen because we have worked it out that way. So just something to reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahnaz.
Can I just add a little bit just to that about, because you talk about the software side, right, which is the culture bit. So quite interesting because the moment I hear that question, I immediately ask, actually, which ministry in my head, which ministry is actually overseeing? So I do wonder whether you are actually having barrier to access. But I was thinking about the kids in terms of learning. All schools have libraries, okay? Have resource, whatever. It's just a question whether it's good or not. But I think when we work with schools, we recognize actually only when you deal with the children's learning, I mean, empowering them, giving them that positive learning environment and all that, then it gets used, right? So it's not so much of whether it's actually there or not. But I must say, from a children's perspective, I always look at this, they already spend 50 hours a week minimum in school. Sometimes we think like, oh, they're not doing so well, let's add more hours. Send them to another place to do. Actually, it's not effective for them. We have to think about how to make that 50 hours effective. So the bit about, I completely agree. I was thinking about which ministry, therefore, that connects, therefore, an infrastructure which we have spent money on, towards what, right? So if is it the children, you should say as a vision, or is it the community as a whole using it? But I hope that you are not being stopped from using all these public libraries for it. Because to me, that's how community should thrive. As in, whatever infrastructure that's within there that can actually be used, that's relevant, that can be used for problem solving, we should be able to use it, right? No? Subject to the state election. Selangor, we are not expecting a change. Can I say? Sorry. Danger. I'm not going.
Thank you. We'll have one last question. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for choosing me. I'm not going to stand up because I came straight from a Pandora event and I'm not dressed for this forum. But my question, I'm going to go straight forward. When someone mentions quality education, in my head, I would imagine the first thing in my head would be being able to be studying in a classroom, in a diverse classroom. Meaning to say, with other students from diverse backgrounds, may it be Malay, Chinese, Indian, American, any nationalities. Alhamdulillah, when I was doing my boarding school in the UK, what I could remember and why I think that I became who I am today was not because of what I learned, in classrooms, about what I had to memorize, what I did for the exams. It was more because of the classrooms that I was able to be in, meaning that I was in a boarding school with 89 different nationalities, and each hostel had about 40 different nationalities. And, I learned way more about life and about myself, as you said, soft skills, by just simply mixing with kids from other backgrounds. I learned way more. My confidence boosted, my English, my communication skills. I learned Russian, I learned English, everything. And when I came back to Malaysia, I realized, I had a very unpopular opinion that I used to mention. I have a very diverse ancestry, but because my father is Malay and I had a Malay IC, I used to say back then when I was in a Chinese school, I was the only Malay in my classroom. And whenever I would say this very unpopular opinion that vernacular schools should be abolished, they'd be like, you Malay, you cannot say that, because Chinese, we need to maintain our traditions. The Indians, we need to maintain our traditions. So I immediately shut up, being, I didn't want to portray any image of myself or what. But when I came back from studying overseas, I realized that, I completely disagree with the concept of vernacular schools. I feel like it was just a consequence of our colonization, being colonized by the Brits. And I still feel guilty saying it. So I really want to know what your stance is on this matter.
Thank you very much. Personal reflection plus a story, plus a good question. Yes. Who would like to answer?
Very tough to answer, but I think I have to answer as a policy maker for transparency's sake. To be honest, when I first joined politics, I wasn't elected then. I remember writing an article about abolishing vernacular schools. That was me back then. And then I realized that, hey, why don't I do enough research about it instead of just wearing my debate hat and doing pros and cons, right? And contextualizing it in Malaysia today. So usually, I think the intention is very good. The intention is to ensure that schools are very diverse, multiracial, multi-religious. And to some extent, the discussion then, as you said, is a single stream, but everyone is together. But let's look from a political perspective. What will transpire when we start opening this Pandora's box? One, to start in Malaysia, there are multiple streams to begin with. When there's a debate about vernacular schools, there will be debates about religious schools, about sekolah tafiz, about private schools, international schools, and many other schools which are tied to it. So how do we deal with all of that? Does that mean when we're against one stream, we're against all? Because the fact of the matter is, in vernacular schools today, there's absolutely no ban on anyone joining the schools. In actuality, they've reduced the barrier of entry so much that today, latest data for Ministry of Education, there are some vernacular schools which are more multiracial than existing national schools. I want to be very clear, these are the exceptions, not the rule. But as time passes by, that's happening. The biggest exodus of non-Malays from national schools happened when the education system kept on shifting its policies on English, on subjects, and then in the end, people said, what is happening? Then international, private schools, vernacular schools became the option, right? So I think we need to make that very clear first. If we know that the objective is that, it's abolishing just one school, which actually opens up to all, achieve it, I personally do not think so. Secondly, when we advocate for it, we say we are all for multiracialism, we want this to happen. Are we willing to make the tough changes in national schools if we do that? I mean, there's either one of two things, right? And this is entering very sensitive territory. It's either you increase the contact hours in national schools, which is in and of itself very difficult. Then you add additional subjects, because again, if you ask me today as a policy maker, do I want Malaysians, including Malays, to learn Mandarin? I say 110% yes. Is that racist? No. The reason why the late Lee Kuan Yew had the courage to do it. The reason why he did in 1970s, 1980s, to make English the main focus, despite Bahasa Melayu, we still Bahasa Kebangsaan. Why? Is because he just said it's the language of business. I want students to get good jobs. We did the shift to English then. Now, I think it's about English, it's about Mandarin, and it's also about Bahasa as a language of unity. Can we add that? It's either we add more time, or which subjects will we dare to cut to add these additional subjects? And when I start talking about that, a lot of people are thinking, what's the first subject I'll cut in national schools today? Very sensitive ground. I don't have to mention it. Everyone knows. Right? And as each year passes by, I remember this, and this is, even though I have a lot of criticism, I mean, for the past few days, it's been a roller coaster for me and to Dr. Mahdi. But one thing which I remember, and to his credit, I remember this, when he was PM, he said, he called the KSU, he said, can you please give me the focus on subjects, and for the school calendar, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5-year period intervals until today. And look which subjects have been deprioritized and prioritized. So he's trying to understand why are even middle-class Malay parents leaving national schools, and why is there a resistance among non-Burmese to join national schools. And again, want to look from pure calendar perspective, right? The school calendar. And then it's telling, I don't have to mention it again, I think a lot of us know. So, why I'm sharing this, I think it would be unfair for me to pin the problems in Malaysia and our education system of vernacular schools. I think if I do that, I'm a coward, and I think I'm doing a great injustice. Especially now when I have the data with me, and I know that it's much bigger than that. Does this mean that status quo is good? No, I agree with you on that. Because I think our end goal is similar. We want schools to be more multiracial, multi-religious, right? And I think that's the same goal. So status quo does not work. So to me, there are a few levels of improvements we can do. Number one, as I shared, there must be critical reforms in national education so that in the end, out of an option like before, our parents, whether they're Chinese, Indian, Malays, will send their children to national school as option number one. We can do it with many incentives. Not our national schools today receiving so much of funding, but above and beyond it, if we heavily digitize our national schools till a point that people realize this is a great boost, I think a lot will come back. Changing of curriculum, by making it a lot more wholesome, tough, but you must do it, I think many will come back and it will become the natural option or the number one option. That's one. Second part behind it as well, while we do that, because that will take a little bit of time, I think from an education ministry perspective, a district level perspective, because the fact of the matter, vernacular schools and national schools are usually located right next to one another. It's always the center point of that particular city or that constituency. There must be active collaborations, whether it's through activities, and you must earmark it not just monthly or annually like what usually is done, weekly. Because you do not want to build, I agree with you do not want to create a world in which, a Malaysia in which neighborhoods have their own enclaves, schools have their own enclaves, and in the end, that separation from young to old makes it tough. The way you break it down, I think you must make that weekly intermingling activities, programs together as frequent as possible. I think that's in the short term which we can do. I know now there's a discussion, but it's not enough. Sorry. I'm going to summarize. This is a sensitive question. I have to be very careful in how I answer it.
Yes.
Yeah, because either way, you'll never be able to appeal both sides. One wants to ban every school, one wants to ban vernacular schools, but we touch other schools. Cannot. We want to reform education, cannot. So I have to be very fair on both sides. So I think in the end, as I shared just now, my solution, parliamentary select committee, less politics there, come up with a proper wholesome policy on what syllabuses, what we should focus on, lock it in bipartisan so that the fact of the matter is democracy in Malaysia today is good. It will be changes in government many times. I see it positive, not negative, including if I lose my seat. It's good because in a way then there's continuity, there's innovation, there are more policy discussions. So my dream again is to reach the same outcome which you mentioned, but through wholesome reforms instead of just looking at one angle while forgetting the others. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I want to thank all of our panellists tonight. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. It's been really wonderful to hear your questions and to have your engagement with this wonderful panel. Malaysia's in good hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Susan Elliott. Panelists, if I could just ask you to just remain there for a while. I'd like to invite Professor Adiba Kamaruzzaman to come and offer the panelists some souvenirs and gifts in appreciation. Praveen, could you please assist? Thank you, Professor Susan Elliott. Thank you, Azlina Kamal. Thank you, Kelvin Tan. Thank you, Shahnaz. Thank you, Wabi Saddiq. Maybe we can take a group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, please give us a big round of applause to the panelists. Professor Susan Elliott, Wabi Saddiq, Shahnaz, Kelvin, Azlina. If I could just ask you to be seated. Thanks, everyone. The discussions today have been significant in not only adding an extra dimension to the Thriving Communities blueprint of Monash University, but also strengthens our commitment to working hand in hand with communities to create lasting impact. Now, in recent years, Monash University, Malaysia, has been working very closely with an NGO called United World Academy. And it was co-founded by my two friends here, Prince, as well as Aziza Aznizan. And we have been working with them very closely in terms of, I think, some part through furniture and equipment donations, volunteer teachers, as well as learning excursions for the students. If I could just have 1 minute of your time, I'd like to show you a video of what United World Academy is doing.
Police. Teachers.
Why you want to be a teacher?
Because I want to help students to study.
You nak jadi apa bila dewasa nanti?
Aku nak jadi doktor.
Doktor.
Aku nak cek gigi.
Hi, I'm Prince.
And I'm Aziza. And this is
United World Academy. Did you know there are refugee kids in Malaysia being denied access to public education?
I remember seeing them on the streets, and I asked Prince, why are those kids out here and not in school?
I told her they can't go to school, they can't afford private institutions, and they can't go to public schools.
That's when the idea sparked. What if we help them? We started off as two young broke graduates, renting a very small space, and with Prince's help, he reached out to his whole neighborhood, he reached out to Monash, and they helped us with supplies, and soon enough, we have made this little family whereby we support these kids by giving them moral, emotional support through their traumas, basic communication skills, life skills. We treated them like normal kids.
Honestly, no humans should be illegal.
We know that we are just two young nobodies, but at that moment, we thought,
if not us, then who?
and if not now, when?
Thank you. Obviously, we're very proud of the contribution of our students, staff, alumni, and industry partners in making the bid for the benefit of humanity. So on behalf of the university, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone, including the panelists as well, who participated in today's forum. A big shout out and thank you to my colleagues, Parveen, Shalini, Ian, Sean Stanley, Sean Choi, and others who made this happen. Thank you as well for everyone else in attendance today for braving the traffic and evening rain to be here with us. And that concludes the formal proceedings for this evening, and I invite you to all partake in the refreshments outside. Thank you very much.